have the immense pleasure and I'm thrilled to introduce today's guest, Dr. Peter Henry Huang, author of Disrupting Racism. And here's a picture of the book. You can see, I think, Peter, you had it next to you as well. And trust me, you are in for a treat. Peter graduated in 3 years from Princeton University. So he graduated at the age of 17 and was a university scholar in both mathematics and economics. He earned a doctorate in applied mathematics, also known as mathematical economics, from Harvard University. His principal PhD thesis advisor was the 1972 economics Nobel laureate Kenneth Joseph Arrow, and that was back in 1972. Peter completed a JD with distinction from Stanford University Law School, where he was a Stanford Center on Conflict and Negotiation Fellow and a John M. Olin Fellow in Law and Economics. Dr. Huang was a staff economist in the Division of Consumer Protection in the Bureau of Economics of the Federal Trade Commission. He has published 68 economics journal articles, book chapters, and law review articles, most recently on topics related to anti-discrimination, leadership, stakeholder capitalism, and social justice. He's a frequent guest on legal and education podcasts where he talks about topics such as how the pandemic changed our personal and professional lives, mental health, I love this one, the zombification of law students and lawyers, and the bamboo ceiling that Asian American law students and lawyers often face in the legal profession. I would also, of course, be remiss not to mention that Peter was also faculty here at the University of Colorado Law School. And as I mentioned earlier, most recently published his book, Disrupting Racism. So Peter, thank you so much for being here. Super excited to talk with you.
Thank you.
Get started. Yeah, go ahead. Anything you want to say before we start?
I'm equally excited or more excited to be here and to talk to you.
Yeah, and I just want to let everyone here know, like the reason we even know each other, right, Peter, is because you were so gracious inviting me to come speak to some of your classes when you were teaching ethics at the law school to talk about Ombuds work. So I'm forever grateful to you for those opportunities. That was always such a good time. So thank you.
No, it's always fun. And the students did not even know how to spell or pronounce ombuds. And they were curious, what is an ombuds? And why isn't an ombudsman? And why isn't an ombudswoman? I said, ombuds just covers it all. And then I think I went to a conference in Pepperdine where I met someone who said, oh, I know someone who is at Colorado. And that's how we got in touch.
Yes, and, Adams, my colleague at the University of Santa Barbara. You met her. Yes.
Yeah. It's great to be here. And legal ethics is one of those classes that's required in the law school. And most students put it off to the spring semester of the third year of law school because their attitude is, I know ethics. I don't need you to teach me any ethics. I'm an ethical person. And what I try to say to them is, I'm not trying to impose my ethics on you. I'm trying to help you pass the Model Professional Responsibility exam. And I say to them, you should not stress out or panic because I didn't take this class. And the reason I didn't take it was not because I was a dilettante. It was because at Stanford, where I transferred from the University of Chicago, Deborah Rohde was a very well-known legal scholar who passed away recently. She believed in a pervasive method of legal ethics education. So that meant there was not just one class dedicated to legal ethics. Every class would cover legal ethics, which is a great theory. But in reality, every professor would say, well, I don't have time for legal ethics, so you're getting into all the other classes, so we'll move on. And I said, I didn't take the class, but I took the Barbary preparation for it, and I passed.
Yes.
So, yeah.
I think I did something similar. Yeah, to the Barbary class. Yep.
Right.
All right, so let's get started. So we're here to talk about your book and about you, about a little bit about you. So tell us about yourself. Tell us about your professional journey. You've done a lot of things.
Yes, as my partner says, you can't keep a steady job. I said yes. So as you mentioned, I have a tiger mom who decided to suggest that I should go to take pre-calc, calc 1, and calc 2 between 8th and 9th grade. Pre-calc and calc 1, where I audited it, And Calc 2, I took it for credit and got an A. And this all started because I had a crush on my 8th grade math teacher. And Horace Mann at the time was a boys' school. And she said, I sent you there so you would not be distracted by girls. Instead, you're distracted by a woman. This is worse than I thought. And so when I came back to 9th grade, there was no math to take. And then she said, you know what? I think you should apply to college. I go, what? She goes, well, if you don't move forward, you're actually moving backward because it's like a conveyor belt. And I thought, this sounds like a Chinese fortune cookie. But so not knowing any better, I applied to a couple of schools. Since when I was in 1st grade, my mother got me the Ivy League book covers. And she said, there's Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and 5 others. to be not even named. So,
even name them.
Right. Harvard said, please withdraw application and reapply in 3 years. We don't want you to have a rejection. Yale just said, you're rejected. Princeton said, you're accepted. NYU, where my mother taught and still teaches in well, she doesn't teach. She's a faculty member in the Department of Biochemistry in the medical school, and she's 94 years old. So, yeah, I think that's a little bit extreme, but yeah. So she really loves doing research, right? And so I think that's part of our identity. So NYU, I could have finished in 2 years because I already taken a bunch of classes, and there was 100% tuition remission, so it went free. But we, and the royal we, she decided she'd go to Princeton because it was at least the 3rd of the named Ivy League schools, and it was very good in math. But she also wrote a letter to the dean of students saying, my son is only 14, and I don't want him to be exposed to, in this order, drugs, rock and roll, or sex. So could he please get a single? So they said, sure. So everyone else is living in a suite with 5 or 6 people. I'm in a single. Most people think, does he have leprosy? Does he? What's the story with this guy? And I had a little bookcase next to my Winnie the Pooh sheets and my Charlie Brown sheets. And the bookcase had all my required and recommended texts for all my classes, because I had written to Princeton University Bookstore in June to say, can you please send me the reading list for each class, because that's what summer's for. So yeah. So then I went to grad school, and my advisor, Ken Arrow, moved from Harvard to Stanford, which always puzzled my mother. But I got to learn how to ride a bicycle, drive a car, date undergraduate females, play volleyball. So basically go through adolescence. So it took me a little while to write my PhD dissertation. As my mother is fond of saying, she got her PhD in biophysics in 3 years and had 2 kids. What's my excuse? I said, I can't give birth. So she also says to me, do you know why you're good in math? I said, yes, because I studied. She goes, no, it's because when I was pregnant with you, I was taking advanced calculus. I said, I see, it's osmosis. She goes, yes. So then I was, like you mentioned, a staff economist at the Federal Trade Commission, which I really enjoyed, and taught economics in a number of schools. Decided I needed to go to law school, because every time we would talk about like antitrust or certain issues, people would say, well, you don't understand the law. And I thought, well, then I'll go learn the law. Mm-hmm. So I started at Chicago, University of Chicago, because it's a bastion of law and econ, but it was freezing. The ambient temperature one day was -15, not the wind chill. That was the actual temperature before the wind chill was added on. So I had to go. And so when I transferred to Stanford, I was much happier. And when I finished, I got a job at the University of Pennsylvania teaching law, because they needed someone to teach securities law, which was an area that it's hard to find someone to teach, because it's very lucrative to stay in practice in that area. And also because my knowledge of financial economics would help give students a context and a background to what's going on in the business transaction. Mm-hmm. So I did that, and I taught at Penn, visited Chicago, Virginia, USC, then taught at Minnesota, then taught at Temple, then taught at Colorado. So, it's that plan to have lecture will travel. And yeah, so that's my journey. And I think now it's time to rest and retire and write books, which may not be that much of a rest, but it's different, because when you write law review articles, you cite everything, like the sun rises in the, I don't know what's east or west, but whatever direction it is, you have to cite You have to have a citation for it.
Yeah.
Right? East, is it East? I think it's East, and it sits in the West. Yeah. Yeah. So you have to either cite Aristotle or Socrates, or as Keanu Reeves says, Socrates. And so you have very footnote heavy pieces of writing, which I think the layperson doesn't want to see every single thing cited. They just want to get the idea and understand how the law affects their lives, or how can the law improve their lives. So that's when I got the idea to write disrupting racism. It was actually during the should I say national unrest, from the murder of George Floyd. And my partner said to me, "What do you think about that?" I said, "What do you mean?" She goes, why don't you write an article about racism instead of all this insider trading stuff, which nobody cares about? I said, "Okay, I'll do that." And
Yeah.
I said to her,
Years, yes.
right. Well, that's the good thing about being in academia. You can read up on the literature, learn the existing work, write something, and then you become one of the people who's in that area. So I thought about it, and I thought there's some literature in economics about racism, and obviously there's some literature in law about hate crimes. The two don't really intersect, because the literature in economics is about people having beliefs about other people based just on their skin color or their ethnicity or their race. Even though we know people are very complicated, multidimensional creatures, the idea of racism is just by knowing your race, I can tell everything I need to know about you, which sounds like a bizarre thing to say. But so an example, "Oh, you're Chinese, you must be good at math." Or "Oh, Chinese, you must be good at cooking." I don't know. Side note is one of my professor friends said that her husband's a biochemist, and she goes, "That's just glorified cooking." So some of the stereotypes seem complimentary, like you're good at math, you're a hard worker, but they're not necessarily, because what they're really saying is your accomplishment, your achievements are not due to you as an individual, they're due to your race or ethnicity. It's like Jessica Rabbit. She's not bad, she's just drawn badly, so she has no choice. And so I said to her, racism is really a case of mistaken beliefs. People believe that people of certain races either will do something, or can't do something, or can do something, or won't do something. It's basically summarized nicely by this one frame cartoon where there's two people approaching each other, and one's white, one's black, and both of them are apprehensive about the other person because they don't know, it's night. So the white person is like singing reggae or something, so the black person thinks, okay, it's just singing reggae. And the black person is whistling Sondheim, so the white person thinks, okay, Sondheim. So the idea is they count risk factors versus mitigating factors. And it's a very simple kind of rule. If there are more mitigating factors than risk factors, I'll say hello to you. If there's the other way around, I'll cross the street. And I said, there's also something called the hot stove effect in psychology, which is that if a cat gets burned by a hot stove, it'll avoid all stoves because it doesn't know when the stove is on or off. So it overlearns. And in some sense, we as human beings are shaped by our experiences. And we have the curse of small numbers as opposed to the law of large numbers. I'll give you an example. If I date someone whose first name begins with S, say Susan, and it doesn't work out, do I say, can't date people named S? Or do I say, can't date carbon-based life forms, can't date females? What is the conclusion I draw from that? Or do I say, this is just a one-off? It doesn't mean anything. I need to keep on trying. But sometimes experimentation is costly, right? Because you could lose your life, you could starve. But in the case of race relations, I think it's really, I don't want to say laziness, but it's this idea that I'm going to rely on a stereotype and I'm not going to try to find out more myself. Mm-hmm. So it's a shortcut. It's a mental shortcut. And like all mental shortcuts, it's often wrong. And so my book's title is Disrupting Racism, because the idea is, I don't know if we can eliminate it, but at least to sort of interrupt it, to make people think. So like Danny Kahneman, who's a Nobel laureate, right, Fast and Slow, right? He talks about how people come to snap judgments and use heuristics and suffer from or experience cognitive biases. I think racism is one such thing. And if you are mindful and interact with people of a given race, then you go, whoa, they're not so bad. They're human. There are good ones and there are bad ones. I mean, it's funny to me because every race, just like every gender, has its exemplars. Mother Teresa, Gandhi. It also has its negative exemplars, the opposite of the. But you can't judge a whole race or a whole gender by one person because there's a whole distribution that's not degenerate at one point. There's people of all types, of any given race, of any given gender. I used to joke with my partner. I used to say, she goes, "You really love math, don't you?" I said, "Yes." She goes, "Why?" I said, "It's hard to explain to someone who asked me that question because it means they don't love math the way I do." I said, "Math is beautiful. Math is creative. Math is not what we teach in school as rote memorization. Math is thinking about the world and thinking about patterns and thinking about how I can understand the world better." And I said, one of the things math teaches us is that if you have multidimensional objects, trying to collapse them to just one dimension, you're going to lose a lot of information. And if you think of it that way, it's not surprising that racism is often wrong. Yet it can persist because if all my friends are racist or sexist, maybe I value not losing their friendship more than I care about the truth. Mm-hmm. So I'm getting ahead of myself because I think one of the questions you're going to ask me is
you're covering like lots of questions, but this is great.
I know.
You're doing
this is the danger of starting me, as my partner says. Whenever I go out with her, she goes, "You don't have to give the best guy salesman a lecture, and you don't have to try to do Socratic dialogue with him. You're not there to teach him. You just want to understand whether you should buy that TV or not." I said it's an occupational hazard. So yeah, I mean, one of the questions people ask me is, have you experienced racism? I go, yeah. I said, people make assumptions about you just because you're certain, what is it, melatonin in your skin, right? I'm yellow, and my mother used to say, "Do you think people when they go out with you know you're yellow?" I said, "Unless I have a bag on my head, I don't see how they could fail to see that or notice that." And she goes, "What do you think people think of you?" I said, "You're asking me to mind read. I have many talents and skills, but I don't know what other people are thinking." And she says, "You could ask them." I said, "They could lie." So I said, I said, it's very interesting because we ourselves, I think, tend to not see our own prejudices and stereotypes. We can easily spot other people doing it, right? So I used to say to my partner, I wanted to have a sign over my office door like Plato: "If you don't know math, don't come in here." And then I realized that would rule out most of my law students and most of my law professor colleagues.
You're not going to have very many friends. Yeah.
Right. So, yeah. But I think racism can be disrupted. At least I'm maybe naively hopeful. Humor is one way to sort of break the ice.
Talk about that, because when I read the book, like, you did such a wonderful, and for those who haven't read it, like, we'll talk about how to get a copy of it, but you use humor and you use it so effectively. It really is disarming, and it makes the reading so much more enjoyable for a really serious topic.
Yes.
So tell us more about your use of humor in the book.
Sure. I mean, I think that's the secret of humor. It is disarming. There's a book that two Stanford Business School professors have written that I cite about taking humor seriously, which sounds like an oxymoron, but their point is, right. Humor is a way to break the ice. Humor is a way to make people more at ease, to connect. It's like sometimes when you go to a formal dinner party or something, parents are all worried about their children and whether they're parenting them correctly. And then someone says something like, "My frontal lobe was just developed last week and my father was very happy." So that breaks the ice. Everyone laughs and realizes, parenting is difficult. There are actually many manuals, but it's not clear, should I be a tiger parent? Should I be a free range parent? Should I be a helicopter parent? Should I be some other animal or inanimate object parent? And a lot of the evidence is actually, it doesn't matter how you parent as long as you don't harm the child, because kids are naturally curious. Kids are not racist. Kids will play with anyone who will play with them. So one of the questions is how do we learn racism? And there's a song from the South Pacific that I mentioned where someone says it takes teaching to learn racism, where like a parent or a child says, a teacher says to the child, "Well, we stay away from that kind of person, whether they're yellow or black or brown or green or orange, we hang out with the people of the same color. And I remember this episode of Star Trek, the original series, where they had people who were half black, half white, and then half white, half black. So they were only on the different sides. But, to the ordinary person, you wouldn't notice that. But to them, it was a way to distinguish themselves and to discriminate and have prejudice. So, and the Blue Eyes, the teacher in Iowa who did that thing where she told all the students with blue eyes, you're very smart. The people with brown eyes are not. And the next day he said, I misread it. It's the brown eyes who are smart. And 40 years later, these kids still remember that. And it's amazing how trivial things can cause divisions, like north, south, east, west, all kinds of things can cause people to differentiate and to say, you're not in my in group, you're an out group. And so I fear you, I don't trust you. And maybe this helped us back in the day as people, that's my partner calling, as people love to say, her ringtone is the sci-fi ringtone. People like to say back in the savannah, and I go, Georgia? So back in the savannah where people, had tribes, and it was important to defend and protect your tribe and not go into hostile territory or something. But nowadays, we have a planet that has climate change illustrated very well by this weekend in California. They had like the biblical things. They had earthquake, they had torrential rain, they had forest, they had fires. So we need to work together to stop, to reverse the global climate catastrophe. And I remember some comedians said this: if you don't like the person on the other side of the lifeboat and you drill a hole in their side, you're going to sink also, right? So, I mean, I think it was Apollo 8 where you see this picture of the moon, from the moon of the Earth, that really made people realize we are one. I can't do what Carl Sagan can do so well, where he can talk about how you're one tiny blue dot in a vast sea of darkness, right? And really, human beings, I would have thought, according to most sci-fi movies, unify when there's a common thread. And I thought COVID would actually unify people. Instead, it has not. It's actually divided us more by saying, I don't believe in COVID. COVID was a conspiracy. And it's just like, we will find anything to fight about. And of course, there's no limit to how many things we can fight about. So that's where I'm not so hopeful. But I think humor is a way to break the ice. Humor is a way to talk to other people and not ridicule them or their beliefs, but say, look, this is kind of silly. So who was it? Andrew Yang was saying, Asians must prove they're more American than ever. And some comedian named Jenny Yang, no relation, said, that's silly. And she goes, why don't I go out and wear a red, white, and blue hat and wave a flag in Pasadena and say, hi, I'm Asian. I'm very good at math. Please don't kill me. And she was saying how if people are beating other people with bats on the head, they're not going to really ask, can I see your transcript or your SAT scores for your math? Right. So racism, I think, is a serious problem. And I don't mean to make fun of it, but I think one of the ways to approach it is to sort of not make light of it, but sort of, it's like science fiction. Science fiction is a safe place to discuss things that arise in our current society because it's a little bit removed from exactly what's going on, right? And I talk about, I think, 3 or 4 other solutions besides humor. One is sort of getting people to work together, not compete, but to help each other so they can see, oh, wow, these mathematicians actually, this is what my mother said. She goes, I was never sure about math until we landed someone on the moon. Then I realized math is really useful. Okay, this is from the woman, right? This is okay. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And another one, of course, is positive social norms or organizational cultures. Basically, having a culture where you realize for a team, diversity is very important. Diversity of viewpoints, diversity of mindsets, diversity of perspectives, diversity of history, diversity of all kinds of things that in America, I think a lot of corporate boards have white men. And if we had more women, more people of color, and a more women of color, that would be beneficial to the company because it'd be different perspectives, right? So, yeah, there's a number of these that I talk about, and it's like a buffet. You choose whatever remedy you think might be appropriate in the context. And really, it's about education. If we can teach people that racism is actually not good for not only the victims of racism, there's evidence that racism makes the racist unhappy. And if you think about it, if you're always seething and mad at people, you're not going to have a calm, heart rate. You're going to be always like agitated and worried about, oh my God, the orange person touched me. Cooties. I have to go wash my hands now. So instead of that, instead of worrying about that, just realize everyone has something to bring to the table. Everyone is of value just because they exist, and to treat other people with respect, the same respect you want to be treated with. So something that's very simple. And I said to my partner, after thinking about this problem, I'm not sure law is the answer, because you can't legislate what people have in their hearts. But you can make sure you don't lynch people, for example. That's a good start, right? And she said to me, I think you're very, not naive, but optimistic about the human race. I said, you have to be. Otherwise, you worry about your nieces and nephews.
Things I love, as I've gotten to know you over the years, one of the things I love about you, in addition to your humor, is also your optimism, and the, good heart person. So I'm looking at the time, we've got 2 minutes, and I want to make sure I ask you your favorite question before we depart, but I'm also looking at the chat. And I won't say names because it was a direct message, but there was a comment in the chat asking if you have any aspirations for serving or consulting for the Biden administration.
What's the word that people always say? You don't want people to actively, you don't want to say, I'm waiting for the reporters to come. But if people draft me, I would be happy to serve, because I think it's important to try to do the best. And I do think it's important to try to share knowledge, which I think sometimes people in academia don't do, because especially now, I think people sometimes view academics as elitist. And that's not helpful, to say, I know stuff, you don't know stuff. I mean, people often laugh at me because I'm the first one to say, I skipped high school biology, chemistry, that song with Harrison Ford and from Witness. Like, I don't know much about anything. I don't know much about biology. I don't know. So I don't know much about a lot of things, but I do know a lot about a few things: mathematical economics, mathematics, economics, law. But I'm always happy to learn from other people. And every day, if I can go to sleep knowing more stuff than I did when I got up, that's a great day. Right?
Yes. Yeah. So it is 12:29. So for those who have to go right at the half hour, thank you so much for being here. We will send a follow-up with links. But hey, Peter, you're not off the hook yet. I got to ask you the last question.
Okay.
What is your favorite drink or snack while you write?
So that changes over time. It's usually Chinese, it's usually dim sum. But I recently discovered Dole Whip. Because Dole Whip is something. So I went to Disney World with my brother and his 2 daughters. And I said, being an uncle is so great because you get the upside, but none of the downside of parenting. And the older niece is 11. She was saying to me, Uncle Peter, they have orange Dole Whip, they have pineapple Dole Whip, they have pineapple orange Dole Whip, they have raspberry Dole Whip. And she goes, you can get an app on your phone that'll tell you where all the Dole Whips are. And then, yes, and then where all the restrooms are after you have Dole Whips.
The two go hand in hand, I think.
Right. So I think I said to her, because we were talking about your question, and she goes, that's so tough, because I think what I like to eat depends on what I'm working on. If it's history, if it's math. And I said, but the best thing to do is work and then eat. Because otherwise you'll be worried while you're, eating that you didn't finish your work. She goes, yeah, but Uncle Peter, that takes a lot of patience. I said, yes, but that's a good thing to learn.
Discipline and patience. Yes. Right. Oh gosh. So do you want to share out where people can get your book? And
Oh, yes. So Amazon has severely discounted my book from $26 to $13 because they believe in using books as loss leaders so they can sell lawnmowers. So Amazon is one, Barnes Nobles is another, and the third one is like a independent bookstore website, which I think is the best one, because I think we should support independent bookstores. But if you Google, or I shouldn't say Google, if you DuckDuckGo or use any search engine, if you go look for peterhenryhuang.com, it'll have a little blurb about my book and some podcast links that I've done about the book. And hopefully it'll have this one in the future.
we'll share it and you can do whatever you want with it.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you again so much for being here. That half hour goes by so
I know.
and you
It
have
went
so
like that.
much to share.
Um,
No.
it
But
was fun. It was a lot of fun, and I hope the audience enjoyed it. And if anyone has any thoughts, questions, just feel free to email me. I'm almost happy to talk about this stuff. As my partner says, he goes,
what's your
yeah. My email, I'll give out my professional one, which is peter.wang@colorado.edu.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
And also on my webpage, there's a contact me form. So right now I'm thinking of doing talks, consulting for politicians. I don't know, because I remember Ken Arrow said, he goes, Ted Kennedy has repeatedly demonstrated the ability to not learn microeconomics. I mean, I think politicians often times have to, their job is to win votes, right? Not necessarily to know any subject matter. And so when I went to a Federal Reserve conference, I asked someone else, oh, what do you do? He said, I work for the Library of Congress. I said, why are you here? He goes, my job is to go teach senators or congressmen, anyone who calls me about any subject. I said, wow. He goes, we can't go with ourselves. They have to call us. He goes, how else do you think they know about things? I said, that's a good point. Right?
Really? Yeah, I never thought of it that way.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, good. Well, stay in touch. I'm going to
I
stop
know.
if you want to hang on. Give me 1 second here.
I see lots of chat. Wow.